Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Noss. I'm the Executive Director at the Santa Fe Conservation Trust. And it's my pleasure right now to introduce our two presenters for tonight's event, Debbie Cress and Bill deBuys. I'm going to read their bios very quickly, and then we'll get into the presentation. And welcome to you both. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Debbie Cress, let's start with you. In your new role as Forest Supervisor for the Santa Fe National Forest, Debbie is overseeing the management, conservation, and enhancement of 1.6 million forested acres across 6 counties in the Sangre de Cristo and Jemez mountain ranges. A New Mexico State University graduate with a degree in range science, Debbie oversees a national forest that attracts 1.3 million people a year. The forest has an annual budget of $18 million and employs 191 people. A native New Mexican who grew up in Deming, Debbie's family has farmed and ranched over multiple generations. Prior to joining the Santa Fe National Forest, Debbie held district ranger positions on both the Tonto and Gila National Forests. Her first permanent job with the Forest Service was on the Tonto as a natural resources and rangeland management specialist. While she was working on her degree in range science from New Mexico State University, Debbie spent summers as a seasonal employee on the Cibola National Forest in New Mexico and in the USDA Forest Service Northern Regions Regional Office in Montana. Thank you so much for being here, Debbie. Debbie's going to be in conversation with Bill deBuys, who I might add was one of the founders of our organization. Can't forget that. But Bill is also a conservationist and writer, and he's the author of 10 books, including A Great Aridness, Climate Change and the Future of the American West, which was published in 2011, and River of Traps, a 1991 Pulitzer finalist. His most recent book, The Trail to Conjiroba, Rediscovering Earth in an Age of Loss, has just been published. He has held various fellowships, including a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2008 to 2009. And he lives on a farm that he's tended since 1976 in northern New Mexico. So I want to welcome you both. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to you to get started, Bill.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's great to be with you and with the Friends of the Santa Fe Conservation Trust. And it's great to be with you, Debbie. Welcome to the big annual event of the Conservation Trust.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you, and we thank you for the time you're giving us to share your thoughts. Just to begin, Sarah read your bio, those are the facts, but tell us a little bit more about yourself. What drew you into this kind of work, into land management, into federal service?
That's a great question, Bill. Thanks. You know, growing up in southern New Mexico, I was outdoors all the time. You know, that was in the schooling that I was doing. It was in working, you know, on my family's ranch and my grandfather's farm. And then in our spare time, when we got our chores done, we went to the mountains because we were down in the desert. And it was always a treat to get up in the trees and see water and experience public land and the opportunity to just roam and explore. So that was foundational to who I was growing up. And as I moved into higher education and started exploring ideas about what I might want to do with my life, I kept being drawn back to the importance of public lands and the importance of serving communities and the people that depend on those public lands for all sorts of reasons, for recreation, for income, for heating and cooking, and a whole range of opportunities. And so I just felt a call to be in service to people, and having the opportunity to do work during the summertime, and when I was going to college, it really solidified that working for a land management agency would be a meaningful use of my time and energy and keep me connected to the outdoors and to what I love about public lands.
Nice. So how did you wind up with the Forest Service as opposed to, say, the BLM? What was the fork in the road?
Well, I think early on, I knew a lot about the Forest Service. I knew about Smokey Bear and the stories there, and just really was most connected to Forest Service lands, from my place in southern New Mexico. I did do work for the Bureau of Land Management for a summer up in Montana and had a great experience. I think all of the agencies provide unique opportunities to connect, but the Forest Service was just part of that, my culture and my history growing up where I did, and provided me with the most ready opportunities to come in as a temporary employee and then convert to a permanent position.
Right.
Yeah.
And so your path, is the sound all right, people? Just checking on the audio quality. But Debbie, the path you've taken has taken you through Arizona, a number of important assignments there, through parts of New Mexico, and it brought you were deputy supervisor of the Santa Fe for a while, weren't you? And
It was.
for how long did that position last?
Well, not as long as I was expecting it to. So when I was a district ranger on the Tonto National Forest and thinking about what I wanted to do next, I was doing some really great work, had great opportunities working in central Arizona. And I was looking for, that next opportunity to expand the service that I was providing to the Forest Service. And with New Mexico being my home, and just really missing the culture and the opportunities over in this state for big conversations, varied conversations, connections with people from many different walks of life. When the position came open as the deputy forest supervisor here on the Santa Fe National Forest, I knew just a little bit about James Malonis. I had interacted with him. He was the current forest supervisor, and knew him to be a really good leader and respected and valued his approach to leadership and land management in the Forest Service. I had heard really good things about his connections here with people. And I wanted to learn from him and work alongside him. So I got that opportunity in January of 2020. And then of course, COVID-19 hit and the pandemic hit, and he was called to service at a higher level. And so I had about 4 months of good time working alongside him. And then he stepped into a different role and asked me to assume the acting forest supervisor role behind him. And so I spent the summer of 2020 working to fill his shoes as best I could. And then he came back briefly in the fall and then moved with his family to the East Coast. And so I stayed in the deputy forest supervisor position for as long as it took for them to advertise it, and was gifted with the opportunity to step into that role permanently only in April of this year. So that's my very quick journey here, not quite 2 years of evolution on the forest.
It sounds like a quick trip from the frying pan to the fire.
Absolutely, metaphorically and literally.
Yeah. So, but it's long enough that I suspect you've had a more than ample opportunity to begin to learn how, and maybe you knew this from a long way back, how unusual the national forests of northern New Mexico are in the context of the national forest system.
I think that's one of the things I really enjoy about the Forest Service, and I haven't had the opportunity to work on a lot of forests, but I have been on a few different national forests here in the Southwest and up in Montana. And you're right, this is a very unique place ecologically. There's, some really dramatic transitions from low elevations and drier climates all the way up to, our mixed conifer forests and our great riparian areas and things like that. And so, ecologically, yes, it's really diverse and unique. And then you add in the cultural component of northern New Mexico communities, our indigenous peoples, and our ancient communities of people who've been using forested lands for a variety of reasons over centuries. It's an amazing place to work.
Yeah. I remember talking with Forest Service professionals long ago who expressed absolute shock and wonder that the Carson and the Santa Fe could be places where harvesting firewood could be a volatile public issue.
Yeah, it is so critical to the people who depend on that. And yet, the harvesting of wood products in general does create a lot of controversy here and nationally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Within the community of the Santa Fe National Forest, did people ever speak of the Hassel Plan?
Absolutely, yes. That is a part of, our culture here in the agency, to begin to better understand how these lands are connected to the people who use them, what that history is, and how the Forest Service needs to be responsive to that, respectful of that, and understanding of it as we're moving forward in the decisions we make to keep people connected to the lands and make sure that they're ecologically sustainable. The restoration work we're doing makes sense and is sensitive to the long history of use here.
Yeah. Just for the benefit of the people watching, I'll just add that after the courthouse raid in 1967 by Reyes Tijerina and the Alianza, the Secretary of Agriculture, Orville Freeman, ordered the Southwest region of the Forest Service to respond to the particular situation of northern New Mexico. And Regional Forester Bill Hurst asked Gene Hassel to develop a plan. And that plan sort of suggested in a way that national forest priorities should be shaped in northern New Mexico, not just according to national goals of timber output and things like that, but to enhance and support local communities.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is really foundational and pivotal work, to inform us in what we're doing now. And I will comment that our new regional forester, Michiko Martin, who has just joined us recently, has actually accessed that information and has made herself familiar with it so that she's building an understanding as well of the importance of our communities here in northern New Mexico. So we're very much keeping that a living document so that it's being referred to and we're refreshing ourselves and reminding ourselves of all that work that was done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really valuable, I think. And not just because of the controversial history of land grants in northern New Mexico and the cultural diversity of Hispanic communities and Native American communities and so forth, but just in the way that the Forest Service as a national organization has been learning more and more, it seems to me, to really respond to and support local communities. Northern New Mexico can sort of be a national leader in that respect, can't it?
Absolutely. I hope so.
Yeah.
I think there's some really good information that's come out of this. And we do believe here in Region 3, which is New Mexico and Arizona, and of course, including northern New Mexico, that building shared stewardship of our lands is really fundamental to the work that we're doing. We've led out on an agreement with the state of New Mexico around shared stewardship so that we're incorporating all of those partners, in the conversations about where the work is most important and what we're doing and how it's impacting communities and how it can benefit communities. So I do hope that we're considered a leader in that work because we're working really hard at it here.
Good.
Yeah.
Say a word more about partnerships. It seems to me that pretty much all the major federal agencies are realizing increasingly that they can't do their work alone, that they need to ally with other federal agencies, with state agencies, and also with lots of NGOs. So how do you, looking down the road, how do you see Santa Fe National Forest integrating with, in a sense, the ecology of other institutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, there already are a lot of great partnerships in place. There's a 232 collaborative here in northern New Mexico that brings together various partnering groups and NGOs along with land management agencies to make sure we're all talking together where, you know, and discussing opportunities for where work can happen. Our shared stewardship agreement with the state of New Mexico has led us to a place of identifying those important parts of the landscape where we want to collectively focus our energy and our work. And then, you know, growing that out to who are the people that can implement this work so that it's not just government agencies that are driving it, but we're bringing in small communities, you know, and providing economic opportunity. We have a really big project here in northern New Mexico that actually extends into southern Colorado called the Rio Chama Coordinated Forest Landscape Restoration Project, CFLRP. It's a mouthful of words.
Boy, it sure is.
But really, it's this amazing footprint on the landscape to look at the Rio Chama watershed in its entirety and not just in parts and pieces. And you know, looking at it from the source of water down to where water is being distributed and used by communities, and how do we all come together to implement projects that make sense, that provide health to the watershed and clean water and opportunities for people to stay connected. So that's our work in the future. That's only going to get bigger, you know, and stronger as we practice it.
Speaking of water, way back when the first forest reserves, even before the national forest, when the first forest reserves were created, one of the big impetuses behind that was the protection of watersheds. People in Santa Fe back in the 1880s were vociferous in asking for protection of the Pecos Mountains as a source of water for downstream irrigators and for the city of Santa Fe itself. So watershed protection is right there at the original DNA of the Forest Service, which maybe got pushed to the side for a while when it became the logging service. But nowadays, with the advent of mega fires, as we go down this road into the teeth of climate change, it seems to me that water is coming back to the forefront. Would you comment on that? Is that a view within the Forest Service?
Absolutely, absolutely. We are having tremendous conversations around that, not only with climate change and just a shift in priorities for people, but you know, this ongoing drought that we have has really brought this to critical mass for so many communities, you know, and we're having really intense conversations about how do we manage for this? How do we get this back at the forefront? And it absolutely is. We have a Santa Fe Mountains environmental assessment, you know, being conducted right at this moment in partnership with the greater Santa Fe area. So several people coming together to talk about, you know, the future of those very mountains that you mentioned. And the primary driver in that is water, you know, and water availability, and making sure that we're making that the top priority for those landscapes, you know, in the consideration of every decision we're going to make.
Yeah. Well, looking at the background behind you, I think I see those mountains. I think that's the Pecos Wilderness, and that's Chimayosos maybe on the right, or
that is absolutely, yep, that's exactly what you're describing. I've gotten the chance to wander up in there a little bit here in my short time with the forest, and plan to do that a lot more. That it's just such an incredible, valuable landscape to connect people recreationally also, but really, you're right, that water is at the forefront of everything we're talking about right now.
Yeah. Last September and October, the end of September, beginning of October, I spent a week camped up in the right center of your photograph. And frankly, Debbie, I was shocked. I've been rambling around that area all my adult life. And I was stunned to see the amount of tree mortality within, especially the spruce fir zone. My companions and I don't think we saw a single stand where a majority of trees were still alive. And most of the stands we saw had 80, 90% mortality if you exclude the very little trees. So we're looking at major ecosystem change there. What is the thinking within the Forest Service about responding to the challenge of change in the Pecos wilderness and beyond?
There are so many conversations happening with great urgency right now. We're working internally with our own experts and researchers, and we're collaborating with external, researchers and partners to, first of all, document what is happening, and the pace and scale that it's happening at. And they're starting to expand that out into not only just mapping and understanding the places that are most impacted now, but where we think climate change is going to drive us in the next decade and the decades to come. And so there aren't any solutions yet, but there's certainly an urgency, a strong sense of urgency in the agency to talk about where this is taking us and what we can control and what we cannot control, how we're going to adapt to this. I've seen some projections, and you're right, many of these ecosystems are going to change dramatically. We're seeing it in our lifetime, and that's going to continue. And so how do we, the questions we're asking ourselves are, how do we make decisions to preserve what we can where we can do that, and adapt where we must adapt, because we know that there are things beyond our control, with the climate changing. And when we have money and opportunities to do work for forest restoration, we want to make sure we're putting that in the places where we know that's going to be sustainable, so that we can concentrate energy and efficiency where it's going to help the most. So I don't have any great answers right now, but I do know that we care very deeply about this. And there's a lot of really smart people working on figuring out solutions, not just, internal to the Forest Service, like I said, but really bringing in expertise from other partners and other researchers and organizations to make it a larger, more collective conversation about how we adapt.
It's a pretty scary future that lies ahead of us. A young, well, now he's middle-aged, but when he was young, he was at the Los Alamos National Labs, a brilliant young forester and mathematician, Park Williams, who left Lannell and went to Lamont Doherty at Columbia, and now he's at UCLA. He wrote a very, very influential paper in which he developed a forest stress index. And based on this index and connecting it to the climate change models, he forecasts that the forests, the conifer forests of the Southwest, were going to be mostly destroyed by mid-century. And these days, when I read the news about California and the fires out there, I think coming soon to a national forest near you. That couldn't be a more scary prospect, and it throws the Forest Service into being ever more the fire service, taking all the money and making it tougher and tougher to do proactive, preparatory kinds of work. How is that going to change? Is there a way politically for that to get turned around?
So I do feel like we have these conversations here in the Forest Service, and I've heard the term fire service, shared. And you're right, we're spending a lot of energy on being reactive. And the question is, how do we get to a place of being more proactive? I think you may have heard that our new chief, Randy Moore, we have a new chief of the Forest Service, Vicki Christensen, retired recently. Chief Moore sent a letter out to all of us recently and asked that we put energy into suppressing fires, where we can do that safely, where we can keep things as small as possible. He wants us to be able to take some time to catch our breath and make sure that we're being understanding, the public's concern around wildfire and the size and scale of these wildfires right now. And so we have some good direction from him to make sure that, in this moment right now, especially this particular fire season, because it is so dramatic and so many of our resources are being sent to places like California, where they have these unprecedented fires, that we here at home are working to really scale our response accordingly, use our resources wisely, take a breath and think about, what our next steps are. You may have also heard that there's an infrastructure bill which is moving through Congress right now. And my understanding from information I've been given, through the agency, is that that infrastructure bill is going to address exactly what you're talking about, which is putting money and energy toward those proactive efforts to do forest thinning, forest restoration, management that makes sense in the places where we can do it, in a wise way, in a thoughtful way. And so should that pass, through Congress and be signed into action, I think that we here in the West are going to see some really amazing opportunities to get into that proactive work that you're asking about. So I hope that's helpful to your question.
Yeah, and it's music to my ears. I didn't realize that there was money for forest protection and restoration in the infrastructure bill. So if that comes through, that'll be a major breakthrough. I'm wondering too about the Forest Service's responsibility or the mission ahead of it in terms of educating the public. I feel as though New Mexico has been fortunate to get a little extra time. If we know that the reality that we've been seeing in California is coming our way, what do we do now in terms of communication, in terms of preparation, just to get everybody, if we can, on the same page?
Yeah, that's a great question, and also something that we're talking very actively about right now as an agency, locally, here in New Mexico, in this region, and then also nationally. There's been tremendous energy and effort put into the Smokey Bear campaign, to educate people about campfires and things like that. And it's been successful, that's an iconic image that resonates with folks. And so the conversation we're having now is, how do we expand that out to build a collective understanding of forest management and forest restoration, and try to separate out what devastating wildfires are versus what prescribed fires can be, the management of fires at a small scale where it makes sense, those thinning and restoration opportunities in the woods. When those kinds of activities happen, they generate a really strong response from the public, because we all want to see a beautiful standing green forest. And so sometimes when those thinning activities happen and there's openings left behind, or we've done prescribed fire and there's a burned area, left on the landscape for the public to look at, there isn't always support for that, and understanding of that. And some of that is basic, education about healthy forests, and some of it's more complex about philosophies, and different opposing scientific views of what's healthy and what's not healthy. And so I think our commitment at a minimum is that we continue those conversations and we continue reaching out at really primary levels to just explain, the difference in the tools that we use to manage the landscape, but then also those more complex conversations, at higher levels with different groups and different ideologies to help understand, the perspectives that are out there in the room, and can we find common ground in how we do this management? Because if we don't, we're going to face some tremendous loss. And so I'm committed to that personally and professionally, and I know we are as an agency, and really building that common ground to work from, where we share, a place of work that maybe we're all a little bit uncomfortable with, but it's something we can use to make progress in keeping our forests healthy.
Yeah. It's a big challenge, a really big challenge.
Yes.
And in the context of knowing that we're entering a decade that will probably see massive ecological change, a couple of decades that will see massive ecological change. Sometimes it seems to me almost beside the point to talk about trails and recreation. And yet we all need that. That's what connects us to this land that we love. And if we don't experience it, we don't know it. And if we don't know it, we don't love it. And if we don't love it, we won't protect it. So I'm wondering where you see in this context, what you see developing where recreation is concerned, because obviously that's a big interest of the Santa Fe Conservation Trust.
Absolutely. And a big interest for us as well. People will not learn to love and appreciate forested lands, public lands, if they're not given opportunity to access those lands. And I think we had a really great opportunity. We still have a really great opportunity as a result of the pandemic. So many people that hadn't been connected to outdoor spaces and public lands all of a sudden did that, and did it, some of them in a way that lacked understanding of what it means to be connected to forest lands. And so there's been some really great energy put into outreach and education to people about recreation and how to recreate responsibly in the forest. And we're going to continue to do that. And we're going to continue to emphasize the value of that, that access to public lands and access to good trails and unique recreation opportunities, so that a variety of people are getting to explore and love, these lands, because that's what's going to keep them relevant and meaningful into the future. If people stop loving them, then we're going to lose support for, that work that we do out there. The Great American Outdoors Act was passed not too long ago, and that has provided an influx of funding for recreation infrastructure, for building trails and improving existing recreation sites, and making sure that communities have, maintained financial connectivity and support from public lands and from forested lands. So it's still very much important and very relevant, not just to the Forest Service and the people that value that, but to our political representatives as well. They're hearing loud and clear from the public that that's important. And not just in National Park Service lands, but in Forest Service lands as well. So I see us continuing to receive funds. Again, if the infrastructure bill passes, there's going to be funding opportunities in that to direct toward recreation. And so we're trying to position ourselves in a way that we'll be able to take advantage of those funds if they come our way, and do the good work of making recreation appealing and accessible to all sorts of people.
Another big funding breakthrough in recent years was the permanent authorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Hopefully that will have impacts for New Mexico. And I'm just wondering, does the Santa Fe National Forest have some without giving anything away, can you tell us if the Santa Fe National Forest has some hopes in that arena where land acquisition might be concerned?
Yes, we absolutely do. We have a lands and realty specialist. He just left us, the current holder of that position here on the Santa Fe National Forest, but we will fill that position again. And it's dedicated toward that work of connecting, with people who want to convert their private lands into public lands. And I just had a meeting with my recreation program manager today, as a matter of fact, talking about some of those opportunities and making sure that we do have, we keep a list of places that are interesting to us that people have reached out to us about. And we definitely will be applying for funds for some small acquisitions. So without giving anything away, yes, it's definitely something that's important to us, especially for if we can acquire unique places, that the public will really appreciate and that can be conserved, as part of the work that we do. And also just that access to public land, sometimes that's an important component of that work. So yeah, we are definitely working on that.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm wondering too, if you think that the patterns of recreation are likely to change in the future, or is the future going to be a repetition of the past, or is it going to be something different where recreation is concerned, and if that interacts with landscape changes and all the rest? How cloudy or clear is your crystal ball on that?
That's an interesting question. I do think that rattles around in my head and the heads of others that I work with, trying to anticipate, where that demand is going to increase. So certainly places with water and shade will always be, the primary places of interest for people that are recreating. And so, as we talked about earlier, those available places may be shifting, they may be moving up in elevation. They may be moving to those microclimates, that hold strong as climate changes and shifts and other places start to dry out. So I think we could do a little bit of predicting just based on some of the climate modeling, and there's some good work that's still evolving here in the region specific to our landscapes. And so I'm excited to learn more about that as those tools are strengthened and we start to get some good data and mapping out of that. So we'll use those kinds of tools to help inform that. And I think I've seen a shift just in my career as some of the toys that are available to people for recreation, some of our motorized vehicles become more agile and able to access different places with ease. I've seen that in my lifetime, just the exploration deeper and deeper into remote parts of our forest, places that you used to have a really specific four-wheel drive vehicle to get to and some good driving skills, or you had to walk, and now there's been an opening up of that access, with some of the motorized vehicles that are out there on the market today. And so I've seen that. I would expect that to continue to grow and expand. So we put a lot of energy into where does that make sense, to allow those kinds of access, and where do we need to temper some of that access so that it's, it's a different kind of use. There's a lot of work that goes into that.
Well, I hope that a lot of work there will be done. Just speaking for myself privately, I live in basically a large inholding within the Carson National Forest, and the proliferation of ATVs in all kinds of places where they never could get to before has become a real nightmare, actually.
Yeah, it's a very dramatic change. Yeah, it's very visible now. And yeah, we do have an awareness of that continuing and making sure that we're managing that responsibly, because we want to preserve a variety of opportunities for people. Solitude and wilderness and quiet places are still very important to a lot of people.
Yeah, and very important for wildlife in the sort of schizophrenic history of land tenure in the United States. The wildlife belongs to the state, but the underlying land of the public lands is mostly federal. And so that's pretty crazy. But as from where you sit leading the Santa Fe National Forest, do you have some major wildlife or endangered species issues that you are keeping a close eye on, or has the Santa Fe more or less escaped that?
No, we definitely have threatened and endangered species here on the Santa Fe National Forest. And very most recently, with the Mexican spotted owl, there was a highlighting of concern about management for that species from some non-governmental organizations, and we worked through that to get to a place where, we're alongside the state and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that we're providing the appropriate mitigations, that we're making, very clear considerations for habitat, which is the part that we manage, as you mentioned, and making sure that we're doing a really good job of wrapping that into the work that we're doing, the decisions that we're making. So it's very clear that comes right at the top of the list of the work we're doing is the conservation of, their habitats, so that they're staying healthy, and we're doing everything we can for those populations. So, that's a really important species. The New Mexico meadow jumping mouse, again, is another really important species that stays high on people's radar and is in a really sensitive place with riparian habitat, and so making sure that we're considering that as part of our decision making stays at the forefront of our minds.
Well, Debbie, I'm really impressed with the breadth and difficulty of your job, especially looking down the road at a period in history that is pretty unusual. I've said to people that if what you really love is to see landscape change, you've been born in the best possible era of civilization. But then again, if you're the kind of person who gets attached to particular places and doesn't want to see them change, it's not such a good time.
Right.
So here we are at an inflection point of history, I think. And so as you look down the road, what are the 2 or 3 things you would most like to get accomplished in your tenure as supervisor of the Santa Fe?
Wow, that's a big question. So the core value that I hold most closely as a professional and as a person is understanding interdependence of people, amongst each other, and the interdependence that we have on our ecosystems and, the worlds, the microcosms that we call home, and the places that we go to connect and relax and feel human. And so what I want most to accomplish, first of all, is just to broaden my understanding of what people value in northern New Mexico, all the people here, all the conflicting, opposing, cooperating points of view that are out there. I really am striving to take time to understand that, to listen to people internally, within my agency, externally with other agencies, and then of course with our communities and the different groups, that represent those communities. So that's not something you can really measure, but that's definitely, the most specific action that I want to take. James Malonis and all of the staff that supported him, and forest supervisors on neighboring forests like James Duran up on the Carson National Forest and Steve Hottenbach on the Cibola National Forest, have spent a tremendous amount of time and energy recently to set in motion these opportunities for work on the landscape. And so we've signed some major decisions to get to work on riparian areas here in northern New Mexico, On the Rio Chama watershed, like I mentioned, we're finishing up the analysis for the Santa Fe Mountains, you know, to be able to do work in there, restoration work. And so I very much in the next 5 years want to see the implementation of that work, the fruition of all of that planning and visioning that's been done. I want to see those opportunities happen on the ground, you know, where we see the restoration of riparian areas that have been damaged for one reason or another. We see, you know, restoration of our landscapes so that they're healthier and we've given them a fighting chance to meet climate change head on, you know, that we've done what we possibly can. There's such an urgency in that work because you're right, we've been given a window of opportunity that other states haven't. You know, we haven't seen that. We've had some big wildfires here. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's some big scars out there on that landscape. There's also some places that, you know, we have a chance to get ahead of it and give them an opportunity to be healthy and resilient. So the implementation of those kinds of projects is really, really important to me. And then that recreation piece is also something I want to see. There's a lot of really great visioning happening right now for our trail systems and recreation opportunities out there and how we're connecting people. And so I don't want to miss the opportunity with some of these funds that are coming from, you know, Congress sending appropriated dollars our way to make sure that the Santa Fe National Forest gets their fair share of that and that we apply that, you know, in a responsible way, in a way that our communities want to see us apply that money and make improvements. So that all cycles back to that first part of just building relationships and maintaining conversations. So I understand what the communities want, you know, what our northern New Mexico residents want and our visitors want to see in their future here. So that sounds a little bit lofty, but I really mean it when I say that.
Well, that's great. You know, you've been absolutely wonderful to give us your time today and to tolerate these questions I've thrown at you. Let me inflict just one more on you.
Absolutely.
And just quickly, if you could comment on what you would like to ask the public to do with regard to the National Forest, besides cut you slack, that goes without saying. But if you could have the perfect public to help the National Forest get the job done that the public wants the forest to do, how would you wave your magic wand?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. I guess I would start by saying, take the time to educate yourselves on what a national forest is and what the components of it are. I think we as an agency have great websites, you know, just chock full of information and opportunities locally and nationally for people to understand the small and the large of what a national forest is. So that would be my first ask, is just take the time to understand where it is you're visiting. I think so often we're just confused with the National Park Service, you know, and with state parks and things like that. And so building an understanding of that, because we are a little bit unique in how we manage landscapes. You know, there's a little more multiple use, you know, on a national forest than there is in a park. So that would be my first ask. And then my second ask is look for volunteer opportunities, because there's so many great groups out there that are working alongside us to help us in the work that we do, not just in the implementation and the physical labor of trail construction or, you know, a trash cleanup day. There's always so many great opportunities there, but there's also opportunities for us to learn from the public, you know, as they're coming and volunteering and participating in activities. So I would ask people to watch for those opportunities and engage in your backyard where you can, or someplace a little further away from your backyard, because there's some great people that come together to make this successful. And it takes all of us, you know, doing that work to really do it in a way that resonates with everyone.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm so grateful. So Good luck with everything you do and with the enormous agenda that you have to address. And now back over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, oh my gosh, thank you both so much. That was just very informative. And I was struck by the challenges that we face in conservation. There's a lot of overlap with the challenges that you're facing, Debbie, at the Santa Fe National Forest. The need to work collectively, collaboratively, looking at entire ecosystems, and definitely working with the public to, figure out how to connect them to nature and help them develop a true love for it to help you in your work to do what you do. So it was inspiring, and I look forward to, working with you in the future. And I can't thank you enough for making the time to talk to us tonight. And same to you, Bill. Thank you so much for your really great questions that I think really illuminated so much about the realities of leading the Santa Fe National Forest. So thank you all again, and good night.
Thank you.